and welcome to this week's Everyday Moodlings-Crafty Challenge. Actually, this is a video I wanted to do for a long time, and it really isn't necessarily about a challenge. Our theme this week, or challenge this week, was home, and at the beginning of the video you saw a picture of my completed project, and there is more details on my blog. If you are watching this on YouTube, there's links in the description to the blog and pictures and supply list and all that good stuff. But what I am doing in the video today is to talk about surfaces and how much your surface and the products that you use really can change the outcome of your project. We talk about this a ton in my color inspiration workshops. We spend usually the first lesson just paper testing different kinds, and not just paper, but testing different kinds of surfaces and how they react to the products that we are using. So one of the things that bugs me sometimes is you'll see these quick tutorials on blogs where they talk about a particular technique that they're using, but they don't give you a lot of detailed information about the surface that you're using. And that can make a huge difference in the outcome of your work. So I'm going to tackle a couple of techniques and using a variety of different surfaces so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. The first one we're going to do is, and we're going to be using water-soluble crayons for these techniques, and the products that you use matter when it comes to these techniques. The first one that I'm going to do is the drip technique that you often see with gelatos. These are a water-soluble crayon, but they work differently than the distress. The distress would not work as well for this technique. So I'm going to stick with gelatos, and I just have 3 colors here, orange and 2 colors of blue. And I have 1 piece of just plain cardstock. Actually, it's probably kind of a cheap cardstock, but it's great for learning. And then the second one is the same cardstock, only I've applied 2 coats of clear gesso to it. So what then is the difference between these two, or why do you even use gesso? Well, gesso is generally used as a primer to add teeth to your surface so it will hold the paint. But it also takes a very porous surface and makes it what I would call semi-porous. It's not non-porous. Glass is non-porous. Nothing soaks in. Cardstock is very porous. That means the water soaks into it really quickly, and it's hard to work with color on top of just plain cardstock, a liquid color, where you want to get some movement to it. Like a watercolor works great with ink, but little harder with something that you really want to add a lot of water to. So a semi-porous surface just means that it's going to give you a little bit more work time before it dries to it and kind of sinks in a little bit. So let's take a look at this technique. And basically we're going to start at the top and get the color. We'll do it this way. Start at the top and get your color to drip down, and we're going to do that by using a little water. So I'm just going to add some color. And I'm going to be kind of heavy-handed here. I don't want to be light. I want there to be a lot of pigment. On my paper. And you want to be careful about the colors you choose so that you just don't end up with mud. I originally pulled out a green, a orange, and a blue, but orange and green generally make mud. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get this color wet, and because it's a water-soluble crayon, it's going to turn into kind of a watercolor paint. Let me grab some paper towels here so I don't make a huge mess. And what we want to do is we want to get it to drip down. And what you're going to notice is that the majority of the color is going to stay on top, and you're going to get a few drips, but they're going to really kind of stick to a single line. Water wants to stick with water. It's going to go where there's water. So if I put more water down here, I'm going to get broader coverage, but still the vast majority of the pigment is going to stay on the top. It's not going to flow down into a more kind of beautiful watercolory look. It's going to kind of stay in these single lines. And that is because it absorbs so quickly. Even though it's still wet right now, it's going to absorb really, really quickly into that porous surface and not allow for a lot of movement. So let's try the same technique using gessoed cardstock. And right away you'll notice it feels different on the paper too. I'm actually feeling like I'm depositing more color on it. And now we're going to get this one wet. And I'm going to kind of work it with my finger. And now you're going to see how much more this pigment starts to move down my paper. And I get these more interesting drips. I can also be far more heavy-handed with my water because the paper itself is protected. And now I'm going to get this really kind of dreamy watercolor effect that I wouldn't get on the cardstock no matter how hard I try. So I often hear students say, or read blog posts, or not blog posts, or Facebook, or message boards, where people will be like, I can't get the hang of doing this technique, or I can't get this product to work right for me. And sometimes the problem is in the surface, not in the technique you're trying to use or the product you're trying to use or what you're doing, is that you're not using the proper surface for the technique. So the more you want to add water, the more you need a, what I would call a porous surface. Sorry, semi-porous surface. Lost it there for a second. Rather than a truly porous surface like this cardstock. And you can also see how nicely all those colors kind of stayed on top, where here they get a bit more muddied, and I actually lost that turquoise one a bit. Just a really nice flow to the color. Now if I wanted more drips, see, I sprayed the water in the middle too, remember, and that allowed it to spread out more. If I wanted more drips, then I would just keep the water at the top and allow it to kind of drip down. Really depends on the look that you're going for. So that's kind of the drip method, and because again it is protected, I could go back and add more color to this if I wanted to, and have even more fun with it. Which of course is the great thing about kind of sealing up your surface to start with. And like I said, I'm using clear gesso, which really allows you to work on almost any surface. So in the picture I used at the very beginning of the finished product, I actually gessoed over the top of pattern paper, which is a really nice effect, which I wouldn't be able to get if I was using white gesso. So clear is my favorite. Liquitex makes a great clear gesso. So because it's protected, I can add more water and really mess with it. If I tried to do that to this one, I would simply start to tear the paper. It would start to degrade on me. Okay, so that's the drip method. The other method I wanted to show you, or the other technique, the other technique I wanted to work with is a lift-off technique. So I'm going to clean up and I'll be right back. Okay, So for this one, we're going to do a lift off technique, and I am going to use 3 different tags here. One is just a regular shipping tag. So this is cardstock, so you should know by now this is going to be a very porous surface. Everything is just going to sink right into it. The other 2 are various kinds of treated cardstock. This one's watercolor paper, not an expensive brand, something I think I picked up at Tuesday morning. That kind of watercolor paper is great, again, for testing and learning, and most of my projects I can use a medium grade watercolor paper. It is cold pressed, so it has some texture to it. This is called mixed media paper. It has kind of a vellum finish to it. And it's very similar to hot pressed or heat pressed watercolor paper, so that it is smooth. Both of these are treated paper so that they're not as porous as an untreated paper. That's what a part of what watercolor paper is, in that it's treated so that the pigments or the watercolors don't just soak right into the paper, which would make them virtually impossible to work with. So we're going to pull out a couple of colors here, blue and yellow, and we are going to start with our tag. We're just going to add some color. I like his watercolor or his distressed crayons. They're very creamy and easy to blend. Now I'm going to blend them with water, but just a little bit on my finger. I'm going to use my finger to blend it. You can also use a paintbrush. You could use a baby wipe. That's one of my favorite things to use. So I'm going to let that one dry a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and add color to these 2, and then I'll be right back to do the lift-off method on each one of them. Okay, a couple of things I wanted to point out before we get to the lift-off method. One, you can tell, I haven't dried any of these, but you can tell this one is still kind of got a little shimmer to it. So this one's, this mixed media paper is holding that wetness longer than the other 2. You'll also notice that this one combined the colors the best. I feel like I don't have a lot of the lines left where I scribbled down the color. This one I still have a fair amount of lines with my yellow. What it really looks like to me is that the color was kind of accepted in a kind of splotchy matter. Like it wasn't really consistent. And you can tell from this one, I can still see all of my lines, and that is typical of a porous surface. It would be really, really hard for me to get rid of all the lines unless I dry blended this. And that is because the color and the water soak in so quickly, and this doesn't really allow me to be very aggressive with it because the paper will just start to disintegrate. So we're going to do a lift-off method, which is to put a stencil down. I love these little smaller stencils. And you can do this a couple of ways. You can do it using a clean baby wipe, or you can simply spray your stencil, and I prefer more of a fine mist for this, and then dab it up with a paper towel. Now you probably have seen this technique done a ton. It's actually done a lot with water-soluble ink, and it actually works much better. Now if I'm going to use a shipping tag for this, I want the paper towel technique, because otherwise if I come back and I try to rub it off with this, I'm going to start to really deteriorate the paper really fast. So you can see a little lift off there. You want to try to keep working with a cleaner area. Now, as this dries, you'll get to see a little bit of that lift off, but you'll notice a big difference between the different surfaces as to how much color I can lift off. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other two. I'm going to let them dry, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you the results. Okay, so my 3 tags are done and dried. And you can see here that the only one that provided some lift off was the watercolor paper. The other ones just did not remove any of the color or enough of the color for me to really see it. This one I can see a little bit up here, but not too much. So, but let's take a look at a lift-off technique using proper products and surfaces. So this is watercolor paper. It's a visual journal by Strathmore. And I use spray ink by Dilutions, which is highly water reactive. Now you can see it clearly in there. And all I did was put this on here, and I used a baby wipe to pick up some of the pigment, and I'm left with an outline or the stencil image behind. So while you can do it with water soluble crayons, it's not the best product for doing a lift-off technique. And if you are going to use water-soluble crayons, you want to make sure that you're using the right surface. And the best surface for that is watercolor paper. And I can guarantee you, if I did it again with gelatos versus distressed, I would get a different outcome then as well. So if you are trying a technique and you're not using the correct product or the correct surface, you may have very different results than what you saw on a blog or a YouTube video or on Pinterest. So instead of saying, oh, you don't know what you're doing, take a look and see if the surface that you are using is not the proper surface. So again, for many water techniques, you need to use what I call a semi-porous surface, something that's either treated with gesso or watercolor paper, which is designed to kind of allow the pigments and water to sit on top of it for a little bit longer so that you have some working time with it. So I hope this has been helpful for you. This is one of the things that has bugged me for a long time. Sometimes I see techniques and I think, oh, that looks so cool, and I try them and it's just one big failure. And it's mostly because of the surface that I'm using. So I try to share that knowledge along the way. If you'd like to learn more about water-soluble crayons, I have a class right now on those, and you can find more information on that on our website or on the blog. If you have any questions about anything I did here, please be sure to let me know. I'm always happy to help. And until next week, I'm Jeree Parks with Everyday Moodlings.